watercolor sheets from Bao Hong. This is cold press paper. It's 140 pounds or 300 GSM in thickness or in weight. The texture is comparable to cold press from Arches, and it is 100% cotton, if I haven't said that. All right. And what else do I have? I have these 4 paintbrushes on hand. I really don't think I'm going to need anything else, nor do I think I'm going to need all 4, but we'll see. This is all I have, all right? And all of these paintbrushes are super affordable. They are synthetics. I believe this brush was like $3 when I bought it 5-6 years ago, and I'm still working with it, all right? I don't have natural hair brushes in my studio. And they're all rounds. This one is a size 14. This one is a size 8. This is a size 6. And this is a size 3. The most expensive brush out of these 4 is this one. This is from Princeton's Aqua Elite. What's it called? Round. It's what's it called? Aqua Elite. That's the line from the Princeton brand. All right. And I got it via Amazon. Most of my supplies I get via Amazon or blick.com. All right. So that's all I have. And then when it comes to my paint, I'm going to be using paint from a brand called Van Gogh. This is student grade paint. It's one of my favorite brands of student grade affordable paint. There is a high color payoff. Colors blend nicely. And yeah, you're able to create great painting with it. It's a great paintings with it, and it's a great place to start if you're just starting out and you don't want to be spending a lot of money on very small tubes of paint. In my studio, I usually have student grade paint. There is a quality that I'm looking for even in student grade, and this is one of the brands that like check off that quality that I need. But what I was going to say is that in my studio, I always have student grade paint and professional grade paint, which has Winsor & Newton Professional in it, and also a couple of colors from Daniel Smith, which I really love. But I also have student grade and professional paper as well. What I'm working on, this is actually student grade that I use to prepare for this class, all right? But the Bao Hong is professional grade. However, I also have like this kind of pad, which is this, or no, I took it out of the pad, sorry. But I have student grade pads in my studio as well because I need to have affordable paper that I can use for explorations and swatches and practice work. The way that I see it, if you're a beginner and, I work on watercolor paintings all the time for tutorials and classes, I need to have a lot of watercolor paper with me. But if you're a beginner, in my personal opinion, you should have accessibly priced paper as well for quicker studies and explorations because you're just getting to know the medium and you want to be creating a lot. You want to be practicing a lot. And if you just have very expensive paper, for me personally, I wouldn't want to use it to create bad art, like you're gonna feel bad for using it, and because you feel like intimidated to use that paper, you're gonna waste it or something. So I think that you should definitely have like student grade paper, and then maybe do your more like extensive projects or things that you're gonna spend more time on your higher quality paper. It's what I think. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about your paint colors, okay? So when I am creating tutorials and I am explaining what colors to use, ultimately what's most important is that you use a yellow, a green, a red, a blue, etc., that has that same temperature and relative value, all right? When you learn about color theory, because that is number one, the problem is what I see in a lot of beginners is that they want to be told exactly what color to use. And oftentimes they feel like they won't be able to arrive at great results if they don't have that specific paint color with those specific pigments or whatever it is. That is really not the case at all. You need to learn color theory. You need to learn the color wheel. You need to learn how to tell warm colors from cool colors, right? And if you know that, you're going to be able to easily replace paint colors. So, what I tell my students always is you never have to use exactly the same colors that I am using, but try to go for a similar temperature and a similar value, and you will arrive at something that is quite similar or very good, even though the colors are not exactly the same. All right. So the colors that I am using for these studies, here they are. Lemon yellow. This is lemon yellow. Lemon yellow is a cool yellow. All right. Versus azo yellow deep right here. This is a warm yellow. Okay. So there is a very big difference between cool yellow and warm yellow. Warm yellow leans more toward the red or the orange, right? It almost looks like a mustardy orange color, while cool yellow leans a little bit more toward the green, all right? Lemon yellow is always going to be cool. But there are also like azo yellow light and cadmium yellow light. Whenever you see the word light in the tube, usually it's a cooler yellow, okay? So as long as you have a cool yellow and a warm yellow, you're good, okay? And then this one is yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a neutralized color, all right? Very similar to browns. In my palette, I place it next to my browns. Okay, this is yellow ochre, this is burnt umber, and this is burnt sienna. Try to ignore my the locations of these colors in my palette right now because they're not exactly where I initially planned them. Like when I first started building this palette, the colors were in slightly different locations, and I started filling the wells in with other colors when they ran out. So try not to pay so close attention to the location of the colors on my palette, but what I mean is my yellow ochre is almost always going to be with my neutrals, with my browns, even my grays, all right? Why? Because yellow ochre is a neutralized color. It's a light beigey golden color, okay? But it is still a yellow. It is still a very warm neutral, okay? It's just leaning a little bit more towards the beiges and the browns. So another color that is very similar to this is raw sienna or even quinacridone gold. Any of that will do just fine, all right? Let's see. Now, moving on to the red that I'm going to be bringing in. This is Permanent Red Light from Van Gogh, and this is a warm red. So as long as you have a red that is warm, you're going to do just fine. What you don't want is a cool red. This is my warm red, this is my Permanent Red Light, and this is my cool red, which is Rose Madder Deep in this palette. In my other palette, it's alizarin crimson. But I always have a warm and cool version of each primary in my palettes because I like going by the split primary palette method, but that is a different story. I have a video on my YouTube channel if you're interested where I go over that. Okay, so as long as you have a red that is warm, you're gonna do just fine. Okay, scarlets are warm. Cadmium red light is warm, even medium is warmer, okay? So as long as you have something similar to this, you're good. The problem is when you have a red, or the problem in this case, I'm not bringing in a cool red. A cool red goes more toward the wineish purple side of the spectrum, right? Because it's closer to blue. So you want a red that is closer to orange, leaning toward the orange, all right? I'm saying all of this and trying to avoid specific paint color names so that you can learn this in terms of color theory and not so much like, do I have quinacridone violet with the pigment, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's cool when you're a little bit more advanced and you want to get very specific and technical. But for beginners, it's very important to build up your skill to be able to tell from like visually whether a color is warm or cool and really build up your understanding of the color wheel. All right. Now, the next color that I'm going to be bringing in is sap green. Sap green is a warm green. It has some yellow in it, or it could be a middle of the range green. So in your color wheel, you have the primaries, which are an equilateral triangle from each other, right? Or positioned within the wheel. And you have the secondaries in between the primaries. Primaries are red, yellow, and blue. And the secondaries sitting in between the primaries are orange, green, and purple, right? And they are babies of two primaries, right? And so you could say that sap green is very close to a middle of the range secondary green. It's not a blue green and it's not a yellow green. I would say that it is warmer for sure than, say, a viridian green, which is a very blue biased green with a lot of blue in it. But it's close to a middle of the range secondary green, leaning a little bit more toward the yellow, I would say. I do like warmer greens, but I'm saying all this so that you can kind of understand what I am thinking about as I'm choosing my colors and what I'm kind of paying attention to when it comes to color temperature, right? That's the kind of green that you're going for these studies that we're working on today, right? The next color, this is called cobalt blue ultramarine in this Van Gogh line, all right? This is a warm blue. Any ultramarine blue, any cobalt blue even. A lot of artists consider cobalt blue a true primary, which simply means again that it is neither warm nor cool. So a true primary is what you would the blue that you would choose, or the yellow that you would choose, or the red that you would choose as you're building a color wheel. That would be a true primary, and many artists consider cobalt blue to be a true primary. It's a warmer blue, and color temperature is very relative because it depends what you are comparing that color with. I am always very hesitant to say this is a warm color and this is a cool color, because it all depends on the context that the color is being used in and the colors around it. However, this is a warmer blue, like an ultramarine blue or even a cobalt blue is a warmer blue than, say, a phthalo blue green shade or a Prussian blue or something like that. Okay, so right now choose a warmer blue. Warmer blues are leaning a little bit more toward the purple than to the green. All right. And there's this huge debate on whether the ultramarine should be considered a cool blue and the phthalo blue is considered a warm blue. But this is because the color wheel can be learned in a couple of different ways. And some people like going by the scientific light waves way to learn color. But in my opinion, or the way that I learned it, this is a warmer blue. Okay. Okay, cool. Awesome. And finally, this is a reddish brown. So this for me, I'm going to be using burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown. You could use an English red ochre, any reddish brown that you have. And if you absolutely don't have a reddish brown, you could even do a burnt umber, okay, or even a sepia if you don't have this. All right. So I hope that clears up questions in terms of paint colors. That's all I'm going to be using, only those 7 colors to paint all 3 fruits. And aside from my paint, let me talk about the other supplies that I have here. I talked about my brushes. These are the pencils that I'm currently using. I love this line from Faber-Castell. It's their 9000 drawing pencil series. I get these via Amazon. And I also like pencils from Derwent. They are also another favorite brand of mine. I would recommend creating your sketches using an HB pencil or an H or maybe a B, but make sure that you're drawing lightly when you're creating your preliminary pencil sketch. And I did make my outline sketches available over on my Patreon. That post that I created with the downloadables is open for free for everyone. So if you want to grab those, they are available. If you're a Patreon member and you can drop in the post where I have made the downloadables available, I would love that. If you could place it over in the chat, that would be super cool for others to take advantage of. But anyway, So if you want to skip over the freehand sketching portion of today's class and you simply want my outline sketches, you want to transfer those onto your watercolor sheet, then go ahead and grab my outline sketches. They are available for you. Otherwise, let's go ahead and practice our freehand sketching as well. You guys that have been Patreon members for a while or checking out my YouTube channel for a while, you know that I love continuing to practice my freehand sketching. I am a big believer that drawing is the basis for all kinds of art, and it'll set you up for success if you want to be able to go out to a park or a coffee shop and be able to draw and to sketch and paint whatever you have in front of you. That has always been my goal, and that is why I share tutorials on sketching as well, and why I explain drawing or teach drawing the way that I do. But anyway, you want to make sure that you keep your sketches light, because otherwise you're going to see your pencil work through the paint, because watercolor is transparent or translucent. And so you want to be able to just, if you're going to be sketching with us, just sketch lightly, and using an HB pencil or a harder pencil grade is going to allow you to keep your sketches nice and clean, so that not too much graphite is left on the surface of your paper, which can end up muddying the paint. All right. Cool. And then I also have these two erasers on hand. This is a soft graphite eraser from a brand called Generals. You can find this brand on Amazon and on Blick.com. I do make sure to use soft erasers on my watercolor paper, because watercolor paper is fragile and you don't want to damage it, because after it's been damaged, you can't really fix it. And I also have this kneadable eraser on hand. This is from a brand called Mr. Pen. I also got this via Amazon, and I like having a kneaded eraser on hand, because after I'm done with my sketches, if I think things are looking a little bit too dark, I just go in and tap and make my sketch a little bit lighter, and then you'll see that the graphite is left right here. Like, this kind of picks up the graphite for you. My erasers are covered in cat hair, so sorry about that. And also sometimes I have cat hairs on my paintings and in my paint. So sorry about that. Container with water, which I may change my water along the way. I'll let you know when I do. And I also have my Blue Scott absorbent towels and regular kitchen paper towels with me, so that I can stay on top of water control. I really enjoy using these towels because they are thin, they are untextured. So at any time when I have to go in and do lifting, I can just easily wrap it around my finger and blot and reveal more of that paper that maybe I have covered on accident or darkened an area by accident, okay? When you are using a towel that is thicker or is more textured, what happens is that you go in, you blot, and you're left with texture. So that's why I love these Blue Scott absorbent towels. They're made for cars. You can get them in like Pep Boys, but also in Amazon. And they do become wet very fast. I'm constantly blotting my brush on this towel as I'm moving along, but they also dry very quickly, and you can reuse them over and over and over again, okay? I think that is it in terms of my supplies. Let me have a sip of coffee. Let's see if I have any questions in the chat, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let me also hide myself from the stream. And I also want to share the first little fruit that we're going to be sketching. And we will be moving through this in layers so that you can see what happens, because this class is all about layering, right? We're centering this class on layering, right? So what happens if you paint in one single layer? What happens if you paint in more? How can you develop greater depth and detail via your layering? I want to cover all of that. But the way that we're going to be moving through this today is we're going to be sketching our fruit with pencil, right? We're going to have all 3 pieces of fruit sketched out. And then we're going to go ahead and work on one layer in all of these. And then we're going to work on layer number 2 in all of these. Does that make sense? I think that is going to be very helpful so that you can see what these illustrations would look like with one single layer, and then how you can continue building on that layer to develop greater depth and detail, all right? And what I want you to focus on here is what level of detail do you personally enjoy, right? One of the main questions that I hear with beginners is, how do I know when to stop? Like, I just keep adding and adding and adding, and then my painting becomes very overworked or flat or dull or muddy, right? How do I know when to stop? And the answer here is, well, it depends on what level of detail you're going for. How realistic do you want it to be? And, if you are wanting to make it more realistic, make sure that you're allowing each layer to dry in between. Make sure that you're not overly darkening areas that are actually a lighter value, right? Because you add and then you get a very flat, heavy result because you're not thinking about value and light and shadow, right? Remember that in watercolor, we are protecting highlights, right? This area here is an area that I protected from the beginning. I didn't go in and paint over that. If I did, I would get rid of my highlight. This area here, same thing, that's the paper. This area here, same thing, that's the paper. So with watercolor, you want to make sure that you see where the lightest area is that you want to keep protected, where your highlights are, and make sure that you work around that, right? And keep that protected throughout the entire process. Notice this lemon right here that I have popped up on screen for you. Where is the lightest area? Ask yourself, where is this light hitting this object from? Where are the darkest areas, right? And I want you to ask yourself these questions in all of these pieces of fruit that we're going to be sketching and painting today, right? The lightest area, I would say, is definitely on the upper part of the lemon, right? Where you see those lightest values. It's like a lighter yellow section. That means that the light is hitting the object from the upper right? And so there is oftentimes going to be reflected light because light also hits the surface, especially when it's a lighter reflective color like white, and it bounces off the surface and hits the object from this side as well. And this is why a lot of times you're going to have reflected light on the bottom, a little strip of a lighter value there, right? Now, be careful because this is a reference photo that I just found on Google the other day. And sometimes you're going to find that there are no shadows or the shadows just don't make sense, right? And this is because they have been cropped or photoshopped or just, cropped out of the background, okay? But what I notice how I left the lighter area here, that's because I perceive that lighter area in the reference photo. I developed a darker value here because I perceive a darker shadow in the center, more or less the center of the lemon there, right? And that is why I developed that shadow there, right? And I by observing the reference photo and understanding where the lights, where the darks and so on, I get an idea for where the light source is. And then I keep that light source in my mind as I'm moving forward developing my values, right? Same thing happens with these two, but for the orange, you're going to see in a moment that the light is coming from the left, not the right? That is why the highlights are here and I developed a shadow on the opposite side, right? And so on and so forth, okay? But yeah, it all comes down to like what style are you going for? And within that, make sure that you are really paying attention to making the medium shine. And with that, I mean, bring in the paper as part of the piece because it's the paper that will help you create those lighter values, and make sure that you're not overly doing layering because that will lead to an overworked result. Artists who work in a lot of layers and are able to develop quality, super high levels of realism with watercolor know to be patient and to allow layers to dry in between. And they continue paying very, very close attention to value, not covering up too much, like adding too much paint or doing too much layering in lighter value areas, because that's going to get rid of the entire, like all the realism that you're trying to create. Okay, so I am going to be trying to fit these three fruits in this sheet, okay? So I want to make sure that I keep my fruits at a size that is going to be helpful for me. Now, I have many sketching tutorials on my YouTube channel, and you can check them out. I even have an entire drawing mini course for the total beginner, which is free. And I can send you the link if you just send me an email if you're interested. You can find me at hello@ericalancaster.com, and I'll send you the link to this mini course after I'm done with the class here, okay? If you're interested in like a sequence of classes that I would recommend beginners go through. But if you have checked out any of my drawing tutorials, you know about the block-in, or sometimes I refer to this phase as the envelope phase, where I bring in a series of straight lines. I'm not trying to create a perfect shape with perfect refined curves right off the bat. No, no, no. Sketching is a refinement process. I need to start laying down shapes and lines on paper so that I can see if the angles are okay, if the proportions are okay. Otherwise, I have nothing to see, nothing to correct, nothing to relate, right? And so for this shape, for this lemon, I just created a series of straight lines and brought those together to create an oversimplified shape similar to what I'm observing there. What's cool about organic things is that proportions and perspective don't have to be super exact and the same as in the reference in order to arrive at something that looks like a lemon or an apple or an avocado or whatever it is, right? They can have slightly different proportions, and as long as the form is created correctly via values and your paint, and your shape looks similar to what you see in the photo, you're going to end up with great results with something that looks like a lemon, right? So this is an oversimplified, this is my block-in, right? Once I have this is the largest shape, right? I always start large to small, general towards specific. And then I start with the second shape that I see there. We see this leaf, and I'm still just using a series of straight lines and bringing those together to create a similar oversimplified shape, similar to what I see there, right? I'm not trying to create perfect shapes with perfect curves. These are just straight lines that I'm using, okay? And then if I want to make it larger, create more of an overlapping, I just go ahead and make it larger, do whatever refinements I need to do. And I can erase this initial line that I don't need anymore. Go ahead and dust this off with my paper towel. Okay. You can make it larger, you can make it a little bit smaller. It doesn't really matter, but I would make sure that there is at least some overlapping taking place between the leaf and the lemon. And there is this stem right here. It's a very short stem. And whenever I'm adding little stems, I sometimes try to make them even more imperfect than what I see in the reference photo. Many times, especially when we're just getting started with sketching, our brains try to make things even more perfect, straighter, more symmetrical, right? Because that's what our brain understands. Our brain understands horizontal lines, vertical lines, simple shapes like squares, symmetry, things like that a lot more easily than diagonals, irregular shapes, and asymmetry. And so oftentimes, if you go on autopilot and stop observing the reference photo, you're going to end up with that kind of thing, a lot of symmetry, patterns, but that's not actually what's happening in the reference. And many times when there is symmetry and a very straight stem in the photo or something like that, I bring in more imperfection so that I can have more of that natural look, okay? I'm just doing a few more refinements here. I'm connecting the stem with the leaf with a smaller, more narrow stem. And I'm just going to fit in a smaller leaf over here on the left. I don't have much space, but you can make your leaf a little bit larger if you have space. And this leaf is in front of this leaf. I'm going to notice what is in front of what and try to get something similar to what I'm observing. Okay, there it is. Smaller leaf. And then this leaf is connected to the stem, right? Great. So there's that first sketch. And now I have to make some refinements. So right now, if you have very like angular shapes and lines, now that we have our shapes and proportions and our main, overlapping, we've understood all of that. Now we can go ahead and soften curves. And I'm going to add that extra little bump over here at the bottom. So hold on. I'm going to just make this a little bit softer. And then I'm going to add in this bump in the bottom. That's it. The very last thing that I would add is just a simple middle vein in the leaves. That's all I'm going to do. Okay. Now, the final thing that I would definitely pay attention to, and that's what I was mentioning about this before, is where is the light? Where are the lightest areas that I want to make sure to keep protected throughout this process? Where are the darkest areas? All that kind of stuff. Okay, ask yourself these questions before moving forward. That's very important if you're going for any level of realism, right? And as I said before, for this lemon, we can see that the lighter values are somewhere around here. Make sure that you're drawing lightly, sketch lightly so that you can continue refining, okay? But the lightest area would be somewhere around there. It doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be perfect, but acknowledge what you're painting as a three-dimensional structure that is being affected by light. And then you can map out those lightest areas in your sketch, but make sure to sketch those lightly because especially here in this area, we're going to use paint that is very watered down and we're not going to be doing much layering. So if this shape is very dark, it's going to be visible there and you're probably not going to like it, okay? And then a dark area that I see is right here under this leaf. This leaf is creating a kind of shadow under it on the lemon right there. Maybe it's a little bit longer, right? I'm just mapping out some shapes so that I can remember where my lightest areas are and my darkest areas are as I am painting. And you can even see how this dark shape looks a little bit green. Do you see that? And that is because the green of the leaf is reflecting on the surface of the lemon. So that can be something that we use as we're developing that shadow shape. Bring in a little bit of green. Instead of just going in and using gray for your shadows, that's also something we're going to be practicing today. How can we make those shadows a little bit more interesting, a little bit more vibrant by bringing in other colors? But that is it for our first sketch. So I'm going to go ahead and check on questions and let's change to our next little fruit. Let's see. Susan, do you have your red? Did that make sense? Did that explanation make sense? And Laura, no, we're just getting started. No worries. Hold on. Yes, you definitely made it on time. I get stuck on getting the reference photo just right. That makes sense, Laura. I totally get that. And I just stay there in that process and don't make progress into the painting part. Oh, let's try to fix that, Laura. Okay? All right, so let's move along onto our next sketch. We have a clementine orange. And I'm going to try to fit that. Maybe I should fit that here and do my avocado over here. Or maybe I should do it like I did my practice ones. Orange here. Yeah, I think I'll fit in the orange right here. And I'll try to get my avocado over here. Okay. By the way, I am using a B pencil, but I usually use an HB if I were doing this just for myself because of what I said before. It's just that I want you to be able to see what I am doing. So sometimes I go a tiny bit softer for my graphite. Okay, awesome. Let's jump right into the clementine here. So I needed this clementine to fit here, right? And so sometimes I find it helpful to lay down some tick marks. so that I can make sure that I'm utilizing my drawing space as best as I can and that the thing will fit in my drawing space. I use tick marks all the time. Sorry, I lost my erasers. So by laying down a couple of tick marks, I have deciphered like how tall I want my clementine to be within my drawing space, right? And then I'm just gonna go ahead and decipher the width of the clementine by just adding in a couple of extra tick marks. I want to make my clementine just a tiny bit wider than it is tall, if that makes sense. I don't want my clementine to fit into a perfect square. So when I am laying down these tick marks, I make sure that there is a little bit more space in between these two lines than in between these two lines, okay? And you can bring in your artistic license because ultimately these are organic objects. So if you want to make them a little bit different, if you want to change the angle of your leaves a little bit or whatever it is, that is perfectly fine. That is the beauty of organic objects. Okay, so once I have this, I'm going to continue with my blocking, right? The same way that I was doing before for the lemon, using straight lines, not worrying about getting perfect curves in, but just trying to get a similar shape over like a general shape that is similar to what I'm seeing. Okay. I'm glad it helped, Susan. Okay. So once I have this, then what I'm going to do for this one, especially because you see how where the stem is inserted or connected to the actual orange part of the fruit, if you look very closely, you'll notice that the stem is actually starting around here, versus with this fruit, we don't really see any of the upper planes because of how it's more of a full profile view. This is not a perfect profile view. So we see a little bit of the upper planes of the orange. And so when I have this happen in a reference, I create some kind of line or mark to help me understand where the stem is going to be connecting into the fruit. Okay. So I start with that line, and then the stem is connected into that. And I'm going to slant it a little bit because of what I said before. I like incorporating sometimes more imperfection in my stems than what I see in the photo so that I can keep things natural, right? Okay. And you can use whatever eraser you have to clean up your sketch as you go. And then we have all of these little bumps here. They'll have to be the same. Just create a little subtle hint of those bumps around the base of the stem. All right. And then from here, I can start adding in, what I like doing is drawing the leaves first and then connecting them to the stem. Because it's always helpful to work large to small. And by having the leaf shapes in and then connecting them, I just find it's simpler that way. Okay, let's see. So this leaf is behind the orange. This leaf over here on the right is in front of the orange. Okay. And then you can connect it, and you can add a line for the middle vein, just the main vein in the leaves. Okay. And then from here, I need this other larger leaf. I'm not going to make it as large because I need my avocado to fit over here on the right. But you can make it as large as you'd like, and also you can also even change the angle of the leaf slightly if you want. What's important here is that you have at least a little bit of overlapping so that we can practice those shadows under the leaves. Okay. All right, great. Hopefully you can see how I'm just bringing a series of straight lines together. When I'm working on my block-in, I'm not creating any curves at all. I'm never going in and trying to create a perfect circle or anything. These are just blocky, oversimplified shapes. You're very welcome, dear. Okay, so from here, I'm just gonna go ahead and add in a middle vein right there. And that is it for my little mandarin or clementine. And once again, I want to encourage you before moving forward, observe the reference, try to understand where the light is in relation to the object. What lightest lights do you see? Where are the shadows? The cast shadows are always going to be opposite to the light source, especially if you just have one single light source in the image. When you have multiple light sources hitting the object or very a diffused light situation, it can be harder to tell where the light source is. That does happen. Light is very complex. But first of all, I want to encourage you, especially if you're just jumping into painting, look for photos where you are easily able to tell lights, midtones, and darks. And if you are easily able to tell that, it's very likely that there is just one single light source, okay? For this one, I can see that the lightest areas are here in the left half of the fruit, right? Make sure to keep this light enough so that you don't see your pencil work through the very translucent paint that we're gonna have along here, right? We also have very light values at the top. This looks very stark light. And it does look like there is some sort of window over here in the back, plus a light source over here in the front because of the very bright highlights that we see over here, right? And I do notice that the shadow is very small. It's over here, almost in front of the fruit. And this is also because of the light that is coming in from the window behind the fruit. We see a bit of a shadow over here. I do want to make sure that my shadow, and I can change the shadow a little bit as I'm painting it, but I want to make sure that the shadow is a little bit larger on the right in my painting because my highlights are going to be here on the left. So if I were to paint my highlights over here and my cast shadow on this side, that would not make any sense, right? That would not make sense because you're telling me that the shadow is in the side of the light source. That doesn't happen, right? So if I'm going to be painting my highlights right here, right, developing my lightest areas here, I want to make sure that at least the shadow is showing like it's a little bit larger on the right. And these are artistic choices that I'm making because it may be the case that my orange ends up looking like this one over here that I painted a couple of days ago, right? And you can see how I didn't leave any bright, stark highlights over here at the top because I wasn't really concerning myself with them. I saw them, but I was painting this pretty quick and I'm not really trying to create a carbon copy of what I'm observing in the reference, okay? So I decided before starting to paint that I was going to respect the light source over here on the left. I was going to respect these lighter values. And as I was adding the cast shadow, I was going to make sure to add my cast shadow over here as opposed to in front of the fruit because if I added it in front of the fruit, then it would not coincide, it would not be consistent with this location of the light source. So you need to make these artistic choices before jumping in and understand that whatever you decide for your light, you have to keep it consistent. Otherwise, it's not going to look realistic. And it is totally fine to bring in your artistic license to simplify your painting process, right? Especially if you're not trying to create a carbon copy of the reference, which I'm never really trying to do. But make sure that you're paying attention to those essential things if you're wanting to make something look realistic. Okay, finally, let's do our last sketch. This is the avocado. Let's see if I have any questions. I try to only use a reference for inspiration, not cup. Yes, elf lords. I love that. I love that. I am a big proponent of using reference photos, but I'm never really trying to create a carbon copy in like 85% of my work that I do, whether I'm sketching or painting, I am using a reference photo or a combination of reference photos. But I always end up with something that is quite different from my reference. I think that references are important if you're going for mid to higher levels of realism because they remind you of little nuances and characteristics that you might have otherwise forgotten because our brains are not made to hold on to all of this important information, all these little visual pieces, right? Um, but at the same time, they remind us of it. I mean, it's by observing things in real life and via references that we understand light and shadows and color and value, right? And perspective, even. And so that is why I think it's so important to develop our observational skills. And you can continue using reference photos as you go, as you're continuing to build your skills and learn about different subject matter as well. Because if you're just drawing, say you love drawing and painting animals, and you're just drawing a lion for the very first time, you could have a lot of experience drawing wolves or owls. But if you've never drawn a lion before, it's very important to understand the animal, to educate yourself on the important characteristics of that animal that make it different from others, right? And we learn by observing. And if we don't have anything to observe, then it's very likely that we're going to be drawing and painting things the way we think they look like and not what they actually look like in real life. And we're going to be struggling to develop any level of realism. So it depends on the subject as well. How much experience do we have with the specific subject on hand? Because having experience with one thing does not equate to experience on other things, right? Okay, cool. Awesome. So there is my block in for my avocado, and I haven't added in the outer skin section that we see down here, which is almost like black. So I'm going to add in that extra section down here. It's an extra shape, like imagine like a smushed crescent moon. And I just attach it over here on either side. This looks a little bit off. I'm going to bring it in. And that's it. Okay. There we go. Okay. And then finally, we have the seed. So I am going to start by adding those same little tick marks, top and bottom, to decipher the height of the shape, and then side to side, left and right, to decipher the width of this shape within the larger green part of the avocado, right? And so from here, I go ahead and start creating my block in for the smaller shape. Same thing, just bring a series of straight lines together. And you can make it a little bit pointier. That seed is a little bit pointy at the top, or you can make it a little bit rounder. It doesn't matter, as long as you're keeping those believable proportions in mind. I always have avocados in my house. I eat them almost every day. And it's very unfortunate when you slice an avocado and the seed is like huge and the green part is super small. But that happens. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but try to keep that normal avocado seed range in mind as you're creating that smaller shape within the larger shape, right? Okay, great. And once you have this, once again, go back to the reference photo and ask yourself, where is the light in this particular image, in this particular situation, in this environment? Where is it? In this one, I can see that the light is hitting this object from definitely above it, but a little bit more to the left, because you see the highlight, a very bright highlight right here on the seed. somewhere around here on the left half, right? A little bit lower probably than mine. Sometimes when I'm sketching, when I'm mapping out my highlights, I make them larger, okay? This does not mean that this entire section is going to be left with just white paper completely unpainted, okay? It doesn't mean that. I make them larger because they are a reminder that within this shape, I should leave a plain white section of paper unpainted. But here, I'm already going to be getting very, very light, okay? I'm going to have very, very light color over my pencil work, if that makes sense. It doesn't mean that all this is going to be white, okay? Okay, and then now we also see another important tip or little clue that tells us where the light source is the shadow. Like you notice the shadow right here on the right, right alongside the seed, right? That is opposite to the light source, okay? And you can see right here a large cast shadow as well on the surface. Try to ignore the other cast shadow that you see there. Try to just observe, or I'm talking about the darkest shadow shape that appears here on the right. That is the shadow that I'm trying to recreate, at least partially here to a degree. That is the cast shadow created by the avocado itself. The other shadow is created by another object that is off the picture plane, okay? So we can see a cast shadow created by the large volume of the seed, and we can see a cast shadow created by the large volume of the entire avocado itself, okay? And that is it. Those are our 3 pencil sketches for our 3 pieces of fruit. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be working on the first layer in all these 3. We're going to go through the same sequence. First the lemon, then the clementine, then the avocado, and then we're going to, that's going to be nice because we're going to allow that first layer to dry, and then we're going to go back and develop a second layer once again in that same sequence, okay? This way, again, you can see how different things look when you paint them in one layer versus multiple layers. And this is, though we're going to be touching or practicing many, many different important foundational skills today, this is the main kind of topic of today's class, is what is the difference between painting in one layer versus multiple layers? It's a question I often receive, and I wanted to make sure to talk about that today in order to really clarify things for you and help you understand when you should personally stop or when you should keep going, and how to make sure that you're not overworking things, okay? So before jumping in, I do want to say there is no right or wrong way or correct or incorrect number of layers to work in. That totally depends on the style, the artist's style, his or her way of working, you know, all of these things, what you enjoy as an artist. There are many watercolor artists that work in one single layer, and there are many that work in 3 layers, and there are many that work in more layers. It all depends on their style and their way of working, their process, and what they enjoy doing. So what you will see though is that majority of those artists who are working in one single layer, it's usually more of a looser expressive style versus artists who work in more layers. They tend to make their work a little bit more realistic and tighter and detailed. And so neither is wrong or right or better or worse. It's like, what are you going for? And the important thing is to learn to develop a nice range of values and a sense of volume of light and shadow in just one single layer if you will be working in one layer only. Why? Because if you don't, you're going to end up with flat looking results. If you know, so you still need to pay attention to volume and light and shadow and value. and highlights and midtones and darks, even if you're working in one single layer or multiple layers. Because if you don't, that's going to lead to a flat looking result. Okay, so I hope that that makes sense. Let me see if I have any questions, and then we'll get started with our preparation of little puddles of color that we're going to be using for this first fruit. Okay, let's see. I try to use, yes, unless you're into photorealism. Yes, definitely. I'm not into photorealism. I do like more of a painterly look, even though I would say that my work is more on the realistic side of the spectrum, but it's not. I do enjoy having visible brushstrokes and a painterly result. Laura, I'm allergic to those delicious aguacates. I swear that's the most un-Hispanic thing to say. No worries, Laura. It's totally fine. I'm sure I know some people here that don't like avocados. Ronnie, what is life without guacamole for a Latino? For sure. I need my guac. I need my avocado and my salsa. I can't eat without spice. Absolute misery. It's unnatural. But I won't risk it ever again, that's for sure. Oh my goodness. Shadow under the lemon. Thank you so much for reminding me. Oh my goodness, Susan. Thank you. Under the lemon, yes. So under the lemon, I am going to add, you can see a little bit of a shadow here in the photo. Notice that little dark space right there. It's very, very small. And then there is nothing over here. And that has to do with what I was mentioning before, how in many cases when you come across these photos, they are photoshopped. Sometimes the object is cropped out and placed on a completely white background and stuff like that, right? And so in those cases, I'm glad that you brought that up, Susan, because when that happens, I want to bring in my artistic license and create a shadow myself if I want to take my painting a little bit further. And for this one, because I do see a highlight over here on the upper kind of right half of this lemon, I'm going to make sure that my shadow is on the below it and opposite to that side, which is on the left. Okay. So I'm going to keep my shadows consistent and create just make a little shape like that on the left. Make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to bring this back here and I'm going to make sure to set my water here so that you can see how often I am rinsing and blotting my brush. I think that's very important. And yeah, let's get started with our color mixtures that we're going to be using for this first one. Okay. Okay. So for the lemon, what we're going to be doing is we're going to prepare the color mixtures that we're going to be needing on our palette because we need to work a little bit quickly. And so, watercolor is very immediate. And you need to go in with a strategy. You need to know what colors you're going to be using to develop your lights, your midtones, and your darks. And for the different parts that you're going to be painting, you need to know. You need to have them ready here. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be creating more mix as you go, but it does mean that you have something to start with and you know what you're going to be doing so that you know exactly what colors you're going to be reaching for when you do need to make more of each color. Okay? So for this lemon, we're going to be using our very first color is lemon yellow, our cool yellow that we were talking about before. That is going to be our first color that we're going to be going in with, okay? With watercolor, we're working light to dark. Remember that, okay? Oh, sorry. Yes, this brush is a size 8. This is a size 8, Susan. All right. Okay. So my second color is going to be this warm yellow, which for me is Azo Yellow Deep. In my other palette, it's New Gamboge or Hansa Yellow Deep. Okay. And then the next color that I'm going to be using is Yellow Ochre. Remember this neutralized yellow that I was talking about before. Okay. And then over here on the bottom, I'm going to be mixing together the cooler colors that I'm going to be using for this little illustration, which are my sap green and my cobalt blue ultramarine. I am making sure to keep these warmer colors separate from the cooler colors on my palette, because the moment that you start mixing warm with if they start mixing together, you can start getting browns and grays. And I do want some browns and grays for my shadows, but that's coming up a little bit later. So in the meantime, I want to keep things organized and separate on my palette. So I'm going to create a puddle of cobalt blue ultramarine. This is my warmer blue. And then I'm going to add some sap green into that to create a darker green, darker bluish green. And this is going to be the darker green that I'm going to be using in my leaf. Let me grab a scrap piece of watercolor paper so that I can swatch these colors out for you as I go. This is a darker green. You can see how I made it cooler by adding the blue into it. And I also made it darker. But the base color for my leaf is going to be sap green on its own. So I'm going to prepare a puddle of sap green on its own over here. And I'm going to create a lighter version of my green by adding some of my lemon yellow into it. So third puddle of green over here, and I'm going to add lemon yellow. The more lemon yellow you add into it, the lighter it's going to be. I need more. There you go. Okay. So I have 3 greens: lighter green, medium green, and darker green, which I have created. Laura, I'm painting on cold press watercolor paper from Baohong. Okay. Right. So that is the combo of colors that I'm going to be using for both the leaf in my lemon and the leaf in my clementine, okay? I have my lighter green, which is sap green plus the cool yellow. I have my medium green, which is plain sap green. And I have my darker green, which is sap green plus cobalt blue ultramarine. So I know exactly what colors I'm going to be using to create my lighter areas, my midtones, and my darkest darks. That is all I need, okay? And that is what I mean. That is what I was referring to before with you have to know how you're going to be developing your different values, okay? If you're looking to have a sense of dimension, a sense of three-dimensional form, value is number 1. Value is even above, it's even more important than color correctness. Understanding where is the lighter area, where is the midtones, where is the darkest darks, okay? And how are you going to be creating those values? That's what's very important, okay? These colors over here are how I'm going to be developing the values in the yellow part of the fruit, right? Does that make sense? Oh, nice, Laura. Yeah. I like this paper. I've been using it for a while. The texture is very comparable to that of Arch's cold press. And I was pleasantly surprised the first time that I used it, and I just kept buying it because sometimes it's cheaper than Arch's. Okay, awesome. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. And as I said, lights to darks. Make sure if this, I really recommend, if this shape here for your highlight is too dark, tap over it with a kneaded eraser or lightly erase it, okay? Especially that lightest highlight shape, because it's going to be visible through your paint. Okay, great. So I remove those greens and blues from my paintbrush bristles. And by the way, I would say that all of these puddles kind of have like a coffee consistency right now on my palette. which simply means that they have a good amount of paint in them, but also some water so that they have a little bit of movement, but they're not just insanely watered down. Okay. And let's go ahead and get started. So, starting with the first color, this is the lemon yellow. And as I said, right now, or before I went in with my paintbrush right now, it was like a coffee consistency. This is an size 8 brush, okay? I am adding more water into just a corner or an edge of this puddle on my palette. And I'm gonna use this lemon yellow in a very watered down tea consistency as I'm going into my lemon with it, okay? Leaving the more pigmented section of the lemon yellow over here. Load up your brush well, and please, please, please don't go in with a super tiny brush, okay? This is way too small for this size. You need to go in and paint swiftly. We need to work fast, because if you don't work fast, things are going to start drying on you and you're going to be left with these texture and lines and all this. These are good for smaller leaves, for the stems, etc. But this is the largest portion of the fruit that we're going to be painting in, and we want to be able to do it quickly, okay? So make sure that you're using a brush size. I'm even, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and use my size 14 because I think that's going to be too small. So adding a little bit more of my lemon yellow, adding a little bit of water. Okay. I think this size of brush is it's going to be more helpful for me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start developing my first layer. And I am going in and just painting over the entire yellow section of the fruit, avoiding the highlight shape, okay? Working around the highlight shape. And the trick here, if you're wanting to develop soft effects, is to go over the entire section multiple times, not just once, but make sure that everything is very light and pale initially, okay? Go over it 2-3 times gently. Sometimes I even dip my brush in my container and just use a little bit of water to re-wet this entire area to keep it wet for a little bit longer. Okay? And once you see, hold on. Once you see that nice even sheen, see that? Pale color, even sheen, the highlight is dry, okay? Then you go ahead and build on that. So first, I'm gonna go in with a little bit more plain lemon yellow, but this time it's gonna be a thicker consistency because I wanna develop my values gradually. So I start placing a little bit more of this pigment or paint in darker areas that I want to develop. I'm observing the reference and I'm noticing where darker values are. And now I'm gonna start going in with my Azo Yellow Deep. And this Azo Yellow Deep, I'm only going to be placing it in like mid-tone and darkest dark areas that I see. And we're starting to sculpt the fruit, okay? I see some little shadows over here, and then a little bit of shadow on the tip here, on the bottom little bump. Notice how I still have areas with just yellow shining through alone. I did not just mindlessly start layering on the color. I'm leaving sections where I have only the first yellow left alone, uncovered by this next yellow. And I'm gonna go in and start just with a clean, damp brush, pulling in a little bit of this lemon yellow into the highlight, because as I said, my highlight is not really supposed to be this large, but I do want to make sure that only a small amount of paint is going into that area so that that can remain very, very light. If you're going to be adding paint into this area, make sure that it's only lemon yellow. You don't want to bring in the second yellow into the highlight, right? But if your highlight is too large and you want to paint in a little bit more color, make sure that it's your first yellow. Okay? Things are still wet and workable. See, check this out. Because I took my time with that first layer and I made sure to re-wet, I still have a nice even sheen all throughout the fruit. And so I can still go in and continue developing my values and continue sculpting. So what is my next color? The yellow ochre. So I'm going to go in with my yellow ochre, coffee consistency, because we're now going in to develop darker values. And I'm only going to place this yellow ochre in the dark kind of band section that I see here, allowing the other sections to shine through with just the first colors. Now, the wetter your paper is, the more your paint is going to expand and move. And as your paint starts to dry, the less movement you're going to have. And the more you continue painting with watercolor, the better you're going to get at knowing when you should be when you should be placing more color and when to stop. And you'll become better at that. You need to get comfortable with the process, actually apply paint on paper, and it's just the matter of painting. You have to do it yourself, experience the materials firsthand, and you'll become better at knowing these things. But it is important to know that the wetter the paper is, the more the paint is going to expand. And the more the paint expands, the more you run the risk of covering up lighter areas if you're not careful. So you may want to just wait a little bit for that paint to settle a little bit longer so that you don't have that amount of expansion and movement, right? For me, it's still very wet and very workable. If I kind of shift down in my chair a little bit, I see that even sheen all throughout the fruit. So I can still keep working and still keep developing that dimension that I want. I could continue placing my yellow ochre to darken the band section here that I see. Core shadow is what it's called. And go over the shadows that the leaf creates as well. Right? And hopefully you can see how in one single layer, I'm developing a nice range of values that will communicate a sense of volume, a sense of mass, right? And this is just one single layer that I'm creating so far. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a tiny bit of green in this shadow that the leaf creates. So I remove that yellow from my paintbrush bristles, remove that excess paint or water from my bristles. I always dab the brush on my absorbent towel after going into my container, because otherwise you're going to continue bringing out water into your mixtures and you're going to get them very, very watery. So there's that. Okay. I'm going to take some green. This is plain sap green, and I'm going to drop it into the yellows right here, where I see a little bit of green in that shadow. And you can see how it started spreading. Why? Because everything is still wet. Okay. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to overblend. The minute you start overblending, you start overworking everything and flattening everything out. So at no point have I done any blending or fiddling with my paint or any of that. That is also a very important skill that you need to develop when working with this medium. I cannot tell you how much I overworked my paintings in the beginning and how hard it was for me to move away from that, especially because when I started to paint, I started my painting journey with acrylics and oils. Those are opaque painting mediums where the process is almost the opposite of what we're doing with watercolor. With acrylics and oils, blending and layering and all of that is not only normal but expected. With opaque painting mediums, you're completely covering up the entire surface of the paper or canvas or wood or whatever you're working on, and the highlights come at the end. With watercolor, white is not even necessary, okay? We're using the paper as part of the piece to help us create our values, our lightest values and our highlights, okay? Now, if you want to lighten anything and the paint is still wet, you could go in with a clean and slightly damp brush, use it as a little absorbent sponge, and do a little bit of lifting in those areas that you think are a little bit too dark, okay? But I think that is it. I could still drop in a little bit more paint if I wanted to. I can still see that the paint, my paper is wet. So if I wanted to push those darks a little bit more in just one single layer, I could go in now with a more saturated, thicker milk consistency version of my yellow ochre and continue dropping it into the darkest areas that I see to continue pushing those. If your paper is already starting to dry, you definitely shouldn't, because that is a surefire way of arriving at this splotchy effect, maybe even backgrounds and stuff like that. So I wouldn't recommend that. That's all I'm going to do, okay? That is one layer. So I'm going to move on to working on my leaf and my stems. And for that, I definitely need a smaller brush. I think this size 6 brush is going to be helpful for me for this larger leaf. And then maybe I keep the same size 6 for this one, and then I switch to the size 3 for the stems. Okay, so I'm gonna prepare my paintbrush by swiveling it in my container of water. And then I'm gonna start painting in the leaves. Now, this is still wet for me. So if I paint this leaf and I touch this edge, which is still wet, I'm gonna get a bleeding effect. I'm happy with bleeding, especially for this type of looser illustration. Where do I have some bleedings here? I had a little bit of bleeding happening with the green here. You can see a little bit of bleeding there where the orange went into the green. Do you see that? That is the type of bleeding that I am referring to. There's a lot of bleeding here in the avocado seed. See that? See how the brown got into the green? I like how that looks. I think it gives it an expressive kind of painterly feel. And if you don't want that to happen, simply allow this to dry completely before moving forward. Okay? I'm just going to go right in and just be careful as I'm doing this, because if I go in with too much water in my brush and I just start painting, I'm going to create a background where the water pushes the paint that is drying there, and I'm going to get a background, a splotch, okay? So you do need to be careful, but it all comes down to water control. But again, you start with your lightest color, water down. This is this is sap green plus lemon yellow. And I'm going to start painting this in. This smaller leaf is on top of this one. So I need to be careful with those edges and make sure that the overlapping is getting transmitted through my painting. Water down green, lightest green. You can see the bleeding starting to happen there along those edges. That's beautiful, okay? You can see how that's a light, pale first green, right? Because I went in with a tea consistency, a good amount of water in my brush, not so much that I start creating backgrounds, but a good amount of water. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add more sap green into this yellow-green, sorry. And I am going to start placing or darkening some green sections in the leaf. And now I'm gonna go in with my plain sap green, darken some sections. I'm really bringing in my artistic license here. mostly the main thing for me is making sure that I'm developing a nice range of values in the leaf. And then finally, I'm going in with my blue-green, which I created by adding some cobalt blue ultramarine into the green. And I'm just dropping it in to areas that I want to darken even more. There's a little bit of shadow here created by the leaf on top. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do, okay? So you can see how I have a lighter section where I just have the lemon yellow plus sap green, very watered down. Then I have some mid-tone sections where I have just the sap green. And then I have some darkest sections where I used the sap green plus cobalt blue ultramarine. And I just allow that to merge together. And I did not overblend. I did not touch it. I just placed my color confidently, similar but not the same as what I'm observing in the reference photo. Allow the paint to do its thing. That's the best thing that you can do if you're wanting to arrive at fresh results that have that glow to them. Is stop overworking, stop overblending, stop fiddling with the paint. Okay? That is one of the most important skills that you can develop as you're starting with this medium. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and paint the stem, and then I'll move on to painting the other leaf. And for this, I do need a smaller brush. This is a size 3. You could even use a size 1 for this. Okay, this is pretty small. For me, sometimes I like using a brush that is slightly larger than what I think I'm comfortable with, because I know that that is going to allow me to paint fast and to arrive at those looser results, as opposed to going in with a slightly smaller brush. I would rather go in with a slightly larger brush than a slightly smaller brush. Okay? Okay. So now for the stem, let's go ahead and use some, this is a very small area, but we can bring in some burnt sienna. This is a reddish brown right here. And I'm just going to add a little bit of this burnt sienna into the yellow ochre to create a light, warm brown to go in with first. And I'm just going to use that color, paint in the stem, and then I could even start bringing in some green. And I didn't even rinse out my brush, because by mixing the light brown that I just created with the sap green, and just you just kind of naturally create that transition where the brownish color in the stem kind of turns into the green in the leaf, if that makes sense. Okay. I'm gonna switch on over to my size 6 again and do the same thing that I did for this leaf. Paint this one over here. All right. So starting with my lighter green, let me move this up again so that you can see exactly what I'm doing on my palette. Size 6 brush, watered down green that has the lemon yellow in it, the cool yellow. And I'm just gonna start painting in this first layer of light pale green in my leaf. Be careful with those edges. Bleeds are totally fine, they're beautiful, but you don't want back runs where you create a lot of splotchiness with a ton of water. Okay. Run your paintbrush bristles over the leaf a few times. You can see that even glistening in the leaf. Then you can start going in with more sap green and darkening sections in that leaf. Don't worry about the vein right now. We can add that later with another layer. Okay. All right. And then finally, I'm going to go in with my blue-green. And I just pop it in there. And this leaf is on top of the other leaf, so I don't want to overly darken it. So that is fine. Okay. And We can go ahead and paint the shadow right now, just in one single, paint everything in one single go. If you don't want the colors in your lemon or leaf to bleed into the shadow, then allow that to dry before painting the shadow. Let's see. Let me see if I have any questions or comments. The more, how long for the paper to dry? That really depends, Ronnie. Um, it depends on how much water you went in with and the environment that you're working in and the type of paper that you're using. It really depends. The more I look at the green, the more I love it. It looks so natural right there. I'm glad you liked this combo, Laura. I think I'm not using enough water for the first layer. That could definitely be an issue. Yes, I'm still learning so much, especially with the painterly feel. I overblend and mix my colors on the paper. To be honest, Laura, it took me probably like 2 years or so to get over the overworking kind of part of my journey with watercolor. And I'm being very honest. And it took for me really kind of putting my ego aside and learning from other people. Because for a very long time, I was very kind of like headstrong and I wanted to like learn to do it myself and be completely self-taught, though I don't really even think that being self-taught is exists because we're always learning from other people unless you are like, completely alone in your studio, you don't watch anything, you don't read anything, then maybe you could be self-taught. But like I went to art school and most of my knowledge of painting I learned on my own because I studied graphic design. So I have a big I had a big understanding of art fundamentals and elements and principles of art when I left art school, but my painting skills were very basic. And all of this I learned on my own. And I learned that I wasted a lot of time trying to do things on my own. It wasn't until I started learning from others and what really made the medium shine and what sets it apart from other mediums that my paintings were able to like go to the next level. Uh, um, let's see. The upper side of the lemon on the upper side of the lemon where I added some darker ochre, I have hard edges that formed as it dried. I hope to learn how to prevent that. So usually what happens is, hold on, maybe I can even like explain what happens and like I need to see it. So probably you need to see it as well, right? Okay, so let me kind of explain what happens a lot of times with when it comes to hard edges. So when we are painting a shape, right? Let's just say that I'm painting, imagine this is any shape, whatever it is. And you have paint that is settling and drying on your paper. Let me make this a little bit darker so that I can better explain myself. Right? Let's just say you paint any shape. When you continue going in with too much water, what happens is that the pigment gets pushed toward the edges and you're left with an outliney look. And then the center is a little bit lighter. See that? See what's happening there? So when you go in with too much water, it's very, very normal for that to happen because all of the pigment that you have in the center, which was settling and drying, it gets pushed out by that water that is coming down from your brush. And it travels and settles on the edges. So that's usually what's happening with that. Okay. Let's see. Thank you. You're very welcome. Let's see. Do you leave the white between the lemon? Hold on. Do you leave the white between the lemon and the large leaf? Do I leave the white? Oh, okay. So, yes, but I don't really try to do that in a very controlled way. If you're referring to this little tiny sliver of white paper and those little sections there, I usually end up having that happen between my elements when I am painting quick like this because I'm remember how I said that I was very careful when I touched the edge of the lemon which was still wet because I want to avoid too much water spreading into the drying yellows. I tend to leave little sections of paper unpainted because that those little sections of paper are going to act as a little wall, if you will, that will impede certain parts of the greens from getting into the yellows. But I made sure not to leave an outline from edge to edge because that will lead outlines are not really present in realism. This way it ends up looking like a highlight and not an outline. And at the same time, it helped my process because it acted like that little wall. Watercolor is only going to expand when the paper is wet. As soon as the paint reaches a section of paper that is dry, it won't expand into that. It acts like a wall. Does that make sense? It's not something that I do when I am waiting for layers to dry and painting section by section. But when I'm painting faster like this, I do try to do that. How do you decide what color use for cast shadow if object just the lemon, not on anything? It depends, Paula, because sometimes I really bring in my artistic license for shadow colors. Sometimes I like using complementary colors for my shadows, which is similar to what I want to show you how to do today, where I take the kind of base color of the object and I add the complementary color to that, which creates a grayish brownish color because they are opposite. Complementary colors are opposites in the color wheel. And when you mix enough of those two together, you're going to get a brownish or grayish color depending on the colors that you're mixing, on the specific paint colors, I mean. And it's a very nice way of creating shadows for whatever object by just adding its complementary and creating that brownish grayish color. But it depends. If you want your like shadows to be very colorful and vibrant, then you can go for another color altogether. Add in a blue. Blues are always beautiful for shadows. Cool colors like that, purple, things like that. But if you want to go super super basic, you can use like a Payne's gray and then add in a little bit of one of the colors that you're using in the object. That's also something that I've done if we want to keep it super simple. What I can tell you for sure, Paula, is that at this point in my journey, I don't ever use ready-made blacks. I don't have ivory black, uh, lamp black, anything like that on my palette. The closest to that, the gray that I have on my palettes is Payne's gray. And what's cool about Payne's gray is that it is not one flat, very neutral black, which can tend to look very stark in a painting or can even dull out other colors. But Payne's gray is a combo of blue and black. So it's cool biased. It's a little bit bluish. And that makes that gray look more natural, more vibrant, more interesting. Um, so yeah, I hope that that helps. But it's you can go about it in so many ways, and it really depends on what you personally enjoy. But it is very very helpful to kind of step away from just using grays and blacks that are very flat and dull. Try to observe if there is a temperature in your shadows in your reference photos, because sometimes you will see bluish shadows and stuff like that. But even if you do only see a flat kind of looking gray or black. Try to bring in your artistic license, your understanding of color and color schemes to make choices for that cast shadow. Because you can paint it really in any color as long as the color is darker, right? Because value is key. You're going to end up with great results. My biggest problem is that I get in a hurry because I'm so excited about creating art. I get that. I get that. Having patience to wait for the paint to dry between layers and sections. Uh, yes, I love that idea of the mother color, Paula. I love that you brought that up. Yes, the idea of the mother color is something that I learned. I can't even remember who I learned it from, but it was actually during a acrylic or oil class where you are using the same color or one of the colors that you used a lot in your composition. You use that same color to create other colors, right? Repetition of your colors and reusing that color to create the different shadows and different areas in your painting will lead to harmonious results. And so using your base color for your shadows is a great example of that same idea. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to show you what this looks like. I would say it's damp, but you no longer see that glistening that I had before. Okay, so I am safe to paint my shadow right now, and I'm pretty sure I won't have any bleeding happening. Sometimes I'm still surprised, but I think I think I should be good. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and show you a simple way of painting the shadows, and this is just using the creating a gray or muted color using the colors that you already have them on your palette, right? So a simple way to make a gray is by mixing together blue and orange, or in this case, I could use burnt sienna, which is the reddish brown that I was bringing in. This is one of my favorite ways to make gray is by combining ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Right now it's looking like a darker brown, a very dark kind of grayish brown. So it's just a matter of bringing in more blue or more burnt sienna until you have the gray that you want. And if your gray has more blue in it, it's going to look like a cooler gray. And if it has more brown in it, it's going to look like a warmer gray. And if you have like a 50-50 amount of each, it's going to look like more of a neutral in between gray. Another thing that you could do would be to mix your blue with your warm yellow, because these two are complementary, or blue is complementary to orange in the color wheel. Okay. So if you mix enough of an orange color or close to orange color and your blue, warmer blue, it's going to look like a brownish grayish color as well. So that's another way that you could go about it. But I'm just going to go with my gray and I'm going to paint that in real quick before moving on to the next. But this is layer number one. And a lot of artists, maybe I should probably use my smaller brush. I'm going to use my smaller brush. This is a very small area. A lot of artists would just leave their watercolor illustration as is with no more layering. I'm going to show you how far I personally like taking it with a second layer. But, you know, a lot of people, this is as far as they would take it. And it's fine. It's a beautiful result, right? Because, I mean, form is still, I'm going to create a slight bleed in the shadow here by just going over the edge with a damp brush. This is a perfectly fine place to leave your illustration if you want to. I mean, it has that watercolor glow, it has dimension to it, it has vibrancy to it. You could leave it there, right? If you want to work in another layer and develop more detail, and with detail, I mean, I'm going to place a little bit more paint here because I lightened it with too much water. If you want to add a little bit more detail, then it's perfectly fine, but allow this to dry completely because otherwise you're going to start overworking things. Um, so for example, maybe you want to add in the middle vein in the leaves, or you want to darken little sections in the stem, or darken, maybe create a sharper shape under the shadow shape under the leaf here. Fine, all that is great, but allow this to dry and then you can come back in wet on dry and add those details in. I'll show you how to do that in just a bit. But let's go ahead and do the same thing in our other fruit. Let's start with the orange. And I made sure to pick different fruits. I'm going to make sure not to completely mess up my lemon. I've done that many times. Many times during classes because I try to keep things visible for you here, as visible as possible. So I made sure to pick fruits that have different colors to them so that we can tackle different questions that I've had on how to shade orange objects, or, so that we can practice different color mixtures. But we're going to still be repeating many of these colors. Show them how to fix a background. Well, the way that I would fix a background is simply to go, like, the way that I would do it would be, number one is first dab with my absorbent towel to remove that excess water. Then I would maybe, depending on how wet the paper still is, I would probably try to smooth things out with a brush, maybe even go over it with another layer of paint. And then I would probably allow that to dry completely. And then depending on how much texture I have after the paper has dried, I can go in and do some gentle scrubbing, do a little bit of lifting to remove some of that texture, and then I can go over it with another layer. That's the way that I would fix a background myself if I were creating a painting and it happened. There are always ways to make your mistakes less noticeable, but I will warn you, the more layering you do, the flatter your results will be, okay? So it is not like when you're painting with acrylics or oils where you can just paint over your mistake or scrape the paint off. When you're painting with watercolor, if you do go in with another layer to fix a mistake, that's fine, but just know that you're probably going to be darkening things, right? Because once you've applied paint on your paper, there is no going back to the whiteness and the brightness the paper once had. So, but yeah, that's essentially what I do. Okay, awesome. Great. So let's start by preparing the colors that we're going to be using in our orange. The process is exactly the same as this, where we go in with the first lightest color, we develop a very light pale layer. We make sure to go over that layer a couple of times so that it can stay wet for a little bit longer. And then we start bringing in the second color and then the third, observing the reference photo. Oh, let me change the photo. Sorry. Observing the reference photo along the way so that we can remember where those transitions start happening between our values. Okay, so for our orange, the first color that we're going to be using is the warm yellow, which for me is Azo Yellow Deep, okay? And then the second color that we're going to be bringing in is, let me clean this off, this section. Hold on. Okay. So Azo Yellow Deep is the first color. And then the next color that I'm going to be bringing in is Permanent Red Light, okay, which is the warm red that we chose. And then the last color that we're going to be bringing into this first layer is Burnt Sienna, okay, which is the reddish brown. Now, we are not going to go in with the Permanent Red Light on its own because that's going to turn the orange to red. All right. What you want to create is kind of a reddish orange color by mixing together your warm yellow and your red. Okay. And you can test this out on a scrap piece of watercolor paper until you have kind of a reddish orange color. That's nice. I think it's comparable to those darkest areas, darker midtones and darkest dark areas that I see there in the photo. Okay. But don't go in with just the plain permanent red light because that's probably going to be too red. And there are watercolor artists that enjoy going in with plain with their colors just on their own and allowing the paint to mix on the paper, but for me, those results are just they tend to be a little bit too saturated and colorful, and I myself like more of a gradual transition between my colors, and so mixing my colors on my palette allows me to have those results, if that makes sense, instead of just always having those colors mix on the paper, because especially when the colors are very different, like if I just went in with a permanent red light and placed it right next to my yellow, certain sections will end up looking very red. Yes, they will merge together if you're using enough water, but I still end up with sections that are very different in hue. And for me personally, that's just not my style. Okay. And I still have over here my lighter green that has the lemon yellow in it. And I have the sap green. And I have the sap green plus cobalt blue ultramarine. Okay. Those three colors I'm going to keep over here. All right, awesome. So starting with a clean brush, I'm going to go into an edge of my puddle right here on my palette again, water a section down until I have more of a tea consistency, if you will. And for the orange, I am going to go in with my size 8 brush. I want to share with you how I approach texture in the orange in a loose, kind of quick way. Okay. And then I'm going to start over here just creating my first layer. And the way that I kind of quickly paint in or describe this texture for the orange skin is I simply leave little sections of paper shining through unpainted. I'm going to dip my brush in my container and kind of distribute that paint that I have just placed all throughout the fruit. Bring a little bit of this into the highlight because this is too large. But you can see how I'm leaving little sections of paper kind of going in with a not a jabbing motion, but more of a scribbling motion, if you will. And that helps you create little sections of paper which are left just unpainted. And that helps you describe texture. Okay. You could even use this technique for the lemon if you wanted to as well. But I really wanted to focus on value in the lemon. I'll show you how to create some texture later, maybe with some splattering or something. Okay, there are different ways that we can create a sense of texture. But there you go. Okay, so there's that first pale layer. And I went over the entire thing 2-3 times gently. I did dip my brush into my container of water and just went over this entire area multiple times. See that even sheen? The highlight is left unpainted and dry, and I have little sections that I have left untouched as well throughout the orange, which are going to help me create that subtle sense of texture, okay? So from here, I'm going to start going in gradually with darker and darker colors. Whoops, had a drop of water there. So first, so that I can take it gradual, I'm going to add more of my Azo Yellow Deep into my orange puddle, thicken it up. I observe the reference photo. I notice where darker areas are, and I start popping in this orange into those areas. Okay. I am using just the tip of my brush and touching the tip of my brush onto my paper, it helps me create little tiny blooms. And that helps me describe texture as I continue developing my values, okay? I should have probably made my highlight shape a little bit lighter before starting with my painting, but you can see how that is still visible through the paint. Okay, so that's my kind of first color, but a little bit more like thicker and saturated. And now I'm going in with my reddish orange, and I'm only going to place this reddish orange color or red orange color in darkest areas that I see in the reference. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but do have the three-dimensional structure of the orange in mind as you are starting to sculpt it and develop your different values. And any overlapping that is taking place in the orange, have that in mind as well. Where are the leaves creating shadows on the orange, right? And if you want to develop more texture, just touch the tip of your brush to your paper and that will create little blooms. Bring to mind or observe the wetness of your paper as you're working and how from very wet it starts becoming less wet and then it becomes damp. And then it gets to a point at which it becomes too dry that you shouldn't be working anymore, okay? If you continue working on paper that is starting to dry, that is also a way that you're going to arrive at splotchiness and too much texture. Now, if your paper is still wet and workable, and a way to tell is lift up your paper, see it against the light, or like shift down in your seat a little bit so that you can see your paper against the light. And if you see a sheen, an even sheen, then it's very likely that you can still continue applying paint. But if you don't see that even sheen anymore and certain parts of your paper are starting to dry, it's better if you do any work that you still have left to do in another layer, okay? So here I added a little bit more of my permanent red light into my red-orange color mixture because I can still continue working. Okay, my paper is still wet and workable, and I can push the darkest areas a little bit more. The more you start developing that range of values, the more realistic it's going to look. Because in order for something to look like it has volume and mass to it and depth to it, it's all about developing that range of values. Okay, remember that. And so that is why it's so important to set yourself up for success and choose the colors and plan the colors that you're going to be using to develop that needed range of values. Okay, you can continue doing your little blooms with your darker color as well. I think I'm going to leave it at that because I run the risk of darkening things too much and making things too red if I continue. I have sharp edges around my highlight shape. So if I want to soften them, I can just go in with a clean and slightly damp brush, maybe pull a little bit of that paint into the highlight shape and soften the edges. That's very easy to do if your paint is still wet. I think this section over here is a little bit too light. I'm gonna darken that a little bit more by going back to my first colors. I don't want to darken that too much. All right, great. Let's go ahead and start painting the leaves. For the leaves, I am going to use, should I continue using that brush? I think that's too small. I think I'm going to continue using my same brush. So back to our greens, starting with the lighter green and making our way toward the darkest green that has the blue in it. Let's see. Ronnie, I'm glad that you could make it. And this recording is going to be up, so you can enjoy it later whenever you can. Have a lovely weekend, Ronnie. Thank you so much for popping in. Alrighty, cool. So let's do the leaves. Same process as before, and try to leave that tiny sliver of paper here and there as you're painting the leaves so that we can avoid backgrounds and that kind of thing. starting with the lightest green that has a lot of yellow in it, lemon yellow. And I'm gonna go in and just start painting this one here. I'm gonna leave little slivers of paper. Some parts are touching, some parts are not. Little slivers of paper. You can even leave little highlights in the leaf as well if you want to add some highlights there. Just leave them unpainted. I'm going in with some medium green. Okay, and then I can go in with some of my blue green. It has the cobalt blue ultramarine in it. You can see those little beautiful bleeds where the orange is bleeding into the blue. Just leave those alone. And see that? The entire trick to developing a sense of dimension is just making sure that you have lighter areas, midtones, and darkest darks. And of course, you can't just, like, you do have to have in mind the structure of what it is that you're painting and the location of the light source in order for your values to look consistent at the end throughout the piece, of course. But generally speaking, value is what's most important. So that is why you always have to ask yourself, how will I be developing that range of values? Okay, next leaf. Observing the reference to remind myself what I am painting, any important little nuances that maybe I forgot. I see some orange in this leaf over here at the top, so I may drop in some orange if I don't get any natural bleeding, because I may. Okay, so medium orange, plain sap green, and drop it in here. And over here, leave some lighter sections. And then I go in with some of my blue green, pop it in here and there. I'm gonna drop in a little bit of orange at the top of the leaf. Let's see. Remove that green from, oops. Remove that green from my paintbrush bristles. And I'm going to take a little bit of my orange and just popping it in. Boop. A little bit more. There. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my size 3 round brush, and I'm going to start with my lighter brown, same brown that I used for the lemon. And this is burnt sienna plus a little bit of the yellow ochre. Okay, so a lighter brown. And I'm just gonna go in. Actually, this is a green stem, so I should maybe use green. Okay, sorry. I'm going to use green, but I'm gonna kind of make it browner just so that the green looks a little bit different in the stem. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab some of my sap green. I'm gonna grab some of my burnt sienna, mix the two, and I'm just gonna create like a greenish brown color. A more muted green. See that? It's a beautiful olive green. And I'm going to use that, and then I'll use the green color combo for my leaves. Okay? So size 3 brush. And stem, slight imperfections to it, smaller stems connecting to the leaves. And there it is. And now I'm going to paint the cast shadow. This is still wet, by the way, but I'm going to go ahead and paint it in anyway. If I get some bleeds, that's totally fine. So I am going to use my size 8 brush, and I'm going to do, how about using this same combo, green and burnt sienna, that I was just using for the stem, the central stem. If I mix enough green and burnt sienna, I should get a brownish color, because burnt sienna, or a dark brown color, sorry, because burnt sienna has red in it. So this is a color that could work very well for the cast shadow, just mixing these two together. But again, you could do anything. You could do the same mix that we used before, where you mix together the burnt sienna and the cobalt blue or ultramarine blue. That's another option. You can go many different ways for the cast shadow color. So just go with what you like. You could even mix together, that's another great color that you could create. If you mix together red and green, depending on the red and the green that you're using, those two colors are also complementaries in the color wheel. So you could create another brownish color that way. Okay. So I'm just going to use this kind of darker brown. And I'm going to use this as my cast shadow color. Serving the reference. Just make your shadows interesting. Use color, especially when working with watercolor. You want to make an interesting use of color. You want to think of color harmony, repeating colors, vibrancy. Awesome. Okay, let's allow that to dry. I am going to change my water. It's very murky and very green. And I don't want that to affect the colors of my avocado. So I'm going to change that. And we'll get started with the avocado. And then, just as an FYI, the second layer or even the third layers, they should be very, very quick, because you're just going in and developing a little bit more detail, maybe pushing some shadows, defining things a little bit more. This is time consuming, but the later, the more layers you create, the less you're painting, if that makes sense. The smaller the shapes that you're painting in are. So, yeah. All right, let me go ahead and change my water. And I'm back. Okay, a lot of people find watercolor difficult and they get frustrated and quit. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I also think that because watercolor is so, like, you can't fully control it, I think that's really difficult for a lot of people, that they're not able to fully control it. But when you learn to let go a little bit more and kind of find that balance between having a bit of a strategy to arrive at great results, while simultaneously within that strategy allowing the paint to do its thing, I think when you find that balance, that's really a beautiful thing, and what will really take your paintings to the next level. Because until that clicks, people usually continue struggling with wanting to overly control it. But the thing about this medium is that that's its beauty, right? That we're working with water, and we're working with these beautiful organic effects that you can't fully control. Um, as I said, going in with a strategy is important, but there is going in with a strategy and then there's trying to control everything, right? I think going in with a strategy allows you to let go more. Okay, great. So, avocado. Left this for the end because we do have, well, these have leaves. This one doesn't, but we do have the seed, and the seed is round, and we want to communicate that sense of roundness. Let me go ahead and change my image. Hold on. Oop. And there we go. Okay. All right. So for the avocado, we're no longer using these colors. We are using the burnt sienna, but we're not bringing in the red and the warm orange. We're using the cool yellow. So I'm just going to clean this up. You don't have to clean this up. I do this because I need to explain the colors that I'm using and I want to make it as clear as possible. But you don't need to clean up your, maybe you have another section like this one over here and you can use that, whatever makes sense for you. Okay, so for the avocado, we're going to be using the light green that we created by mixing together the green with the cool yellow, right? So the same light green that we have been using in the leaves is what I'm going to be using, maybe with a little bit more yellow so that it can look really, really light. And then from there, let me make more of this very light yellow. Take it a step at a time, okay? Very, very light green. You can observe the reference photo and try to get a similar green to what you're observing there. Maybe even more yellow. I think that's good, okay? And then the green gets darker as it gets closer to the edges of the avocado, right? So we're going to be adding more sap green as we make our way closer to the edges. It's fine if I have a little bit of blue there. It really doesn't matter, okay? It's just going to look a little bit darker. But that's what I'm going to be doing for my greens in the flesh, in the edible part of the avocado. Then for the pit, my first color in the pit is going to be yellow ochre, that light beigey, neutralized yellow golden color. It's going to be the first one in the seed. And then from there, I'm going to add burnt sienna into the yellow ochre. And I'm going to add more and more burnt sienna as I make my way toward the darker values in the seed. And it's going to be helpful because there is this very big jump between the yellow ochre and the burnt sienna to have a middle bridge color between the two, okay? And as you're painting, you can always shift and change the ratios of your paint colors and your mixtures. In fact, this is something that you need to get comfortable doing. Not only changing the water to paint ratios in your puddles, but also the color to color ratios, depending on whether you're developing lighter values, midtones, or darkest darks. Okay? And the only way to get comfortable doing that is painting, and painting a lot. Okay? All right. And then I will be creating an even darker brown. And I think I want to make that brown I want to create that over here. And it's the same color combo that I was using to create this gray. It's burnt sienna, which is the same reddish brown color that I was using over here, with some of my cobalt blue ultramarine. This is going to create a darker chocolatey brown, okay? So lightest color in the seed is the yellow ochre. Then you have this middle transition color, which is yellow ochre plus burnt sienna. Then you have burnt sienna. And then to push the darkest darks in the seed, because I do see some very dark brown areas, I'm going to use this darker brown that I have created by mixing together burnt sienna with a little bit of blue. Okay? Great. Now, for the outer rough skin of the avocado, I'm going to be using this same color combo, but I'm going to be turning it more into a gray by, you guessed it, just adding more of my blue into this mixture. Okay? Keeping things really simple and well integrated because I'm repeating colors. Okay? Okay, awesome. So let's start with the green in the avocado, and I think I'm going to continue using my size 8 brush for this. And I'm going to start with the lighter green that has plenty of lemon yellow in it. And I'm just going to go ahead and start filling in the entire flesh of the avocado. This is a relatively large shape, so continue coming back to where you first started. Dip your brush in your container and go in with just a little bit of water in your brush. Pull that color into the entire area here. Distribute it, making sure that you're keeping everything very pale so that you can build up your values gradually. Dip my brush in my container. I don't want to get too dark. Avoid those outlines along the edges by running your paintbrush over those areas closer to the edges and going over everything while the paint is still wet. Okay, bring in, if you need to grab more paint, that's fine, but just make sure that you're not bringing in paint that is too thick or that you're going too dark, because this is just the first layer. Okay, great. Going over everything a couple of times. So I have that even sheen all throughout the green portion of the avocado. Didn't paint the seed right now. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and start painting in more sap green, adding more sap green into my lighter green. And I'm starting by adding it along the outer edges because those are the darkest areas. The middle section and the inner section are very, very light. I don't want to darken that. I want to leave that very, very light, okay? And you can see how I'm getting these soft transitions because I'm applying paint on wet paper. If I want to help those transitions, if I want to soften the transition from my lighter green to my darker green, I remove that paint from my paintbrush bristles, remove that excess water because I don't want to create backruns. And then I'm just going to very, very gently run my bristles along the middle, or along the place where the lighter yellow meets the green, the darker green, and just soften the transition a little bit. Okay, that's it. I don't want to keep going. Now I can darken the outer edge a little bit more by going in with an even darker green. As my paper starts, or my paint starts to settle on my paper, I know that I'm going to get less movement and my darker color is going to stay tighter, constricted in the area that I'm placing it in. As long as the paper is still wet, I'm still going to get those soft edges. But as the paper becomes damp, less wet, more damp, it's not going to expand as much, right? Now, if you want to go back to the very first color or you want to intensify the yellow, if your paper is still wet, you can go in and drop in your first color closest to the seed, but just don't overdo it. This camera has a little bit of an issue with lighter colors and yellows, but in front of me, these greens look a lot more vibrant, more yellow in the center, okay? Okay, great. So now we can go ahead and start painting in the seed. And again, in this little test run that I did the other day, I have a lot of bleeding where the brown bled into my green. Okay. If you don't want that, just allow the green to dry completely before painting the seed. I kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Remember that little hack where you can leave little slivers of paper unpainted around the seed if you want. Just make sure that you're not leaving a white unpainted outline all around the seed, because that is going to lead to an outline look. And in realism, we don't have outlines. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start with, maybe I should use a smaller brush for the seed. I'm going to use the size 6. Let's see. Elf Lords, thank you for popping in. It was great to see you and to chat with you today. And I wish you a wonderful weekend. And make sure to stay tuned, because I'm going to be doing these every month. And I'm going to be doing a watercolor class followed by a sketching class, followed by a watercolor class, followed by a sketching class. Because for me, drawing is very important and I want to continue supporting you in that way as well. So stay tuned. It's always going to happen unless something happens and I, for some reason, have an event or something. They are always going to be happening on the 3rd Saturday of every month. All right. And if you want updates, and I always share updates on Instagram, you can find me at Erica_Lancaster_art over on Instagram. I always let you know when these will be taking place. Over on Patreon, of course, my Patreon members are the first ones to know about these, and also they are the ones who choose the topic of the class. So if you're interested in joining my Patreon, you can also find me over there. Shoot me an email. I'd be happy to help you out. You can find me at hello@ericalancaster.com. Okay. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to talk to you soon. Absolutely, Sharon. Thank you so much for popping in. It was great to see you, and have a wonderful weekend. I'm so happy to hear that, Miss Piano. That's definitely what I aim for. Alrighty, cool. So let's do the seed. So as I said, the first color in the seed is the yellow ochre, right? Then we have this transition color. Then we're going to go into the burnt sienna on its own. And then we have the darkest brown. So first I want to go in with a tea consistency yellow ochre taken from the edge of my puddle. And I'm going to work around the highlight. So I'm just going to paint around this. It's a very small highlight compared to the ones that we have been kind of painting so far. So be careful with that. And the idea is the same. I'm going to touch this lightest brown to my green in some sections, and others I'm leaving just a little sliver of paper. And then I'm adding more yellow ochre into the mixture, and I'm just placing it just in the mid-tone sections, not so much the darkest sections, which again, the darkest sections are opposite to the highlight on the, there is some reflected light on this side of the avocado seed for sure. I can see some lighter values there. But by noticing the cast shadows on the right, you can get the idea that the darker areas are somewhere in the right half of the seed, okay? And that is the main idea that we have to keep kind of consistent throughout the illustration. Okay, so this is my medium, or the bridge tone or color that I created by mixing the yellow ochre with the burnt sienna, and I'm going to pop this in. The darker I get, the more I want to focus on adding these darker colors into the right half, which is the darker half opposite to the light source. Yes, there are some lighter values, but what's most important to me, what I want to prioritize, is keeping the lighting consistent. Okay. Okay, great. So if I want to use my brush as a little absorbent sponge to lift up some paint from any area. I can go ahead and do that. And another thing that I'm going to do is soften the edges of my highlight by going in with a clean and slightly damp brush. You can pull in some of that wet paint into the highlight. You could even add some of your lighter color in that highlight section if it's too large. If it's looking too large, go back to the lightest color or the medium bridge color and make it smaller. Okay, great. I think the sliver of white paper is a little bit too large. I'm going to make it smaller by just pushing the pigment into the opposite color. Great. Okay, I like those bleeds. They look great. To me, I like them. So I'm going to finally go in with my darkest brown, and I'm just going to be using this in the kind of the bottom and maybe a tiny bit at the top of this avocado seed. The darker I get with my color, the more careful I want to be about making sure that I'm using it in just the right places. With the lightest color, you can be a little bit more free, cover up a larger section with your lightest color. But the darker you get, the more careful you want to be. You can add in more blue into your mix. See that? That is super dark. So what can I do to fix that? Here's what I would do. I remove this color from my paintbrush bristles, remove that excess water by dabbing my brush on my towel, and I just go in to do some gentle, very, very gentle lifting and smoothing out of this color, and that will soften that effect. And then I can simply add more burnt sienna into the mix to make it lighter again, because the problem is that I added too much blue. I got overly confident there. And by adding too much blue, it started turning into like a grayish color. I didn't want a grayish color. I wanted a dark brown. So there it is. Shifted the ratios, softened the color, and just added a little bit more of the correct color that I wanted. Great. I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to paint the shadow. Or maybe I should probably paint the outer skin. So for the outer skin, I'm going to add the more blue into my brown and get it more toward the gray. We need a very dark gray, almost black looking color for the avocado skin. So it's the same mix that I just used for the darkest brown in the seed. I just pushed the blue to get it more toward the gray again. And once you have a good looking color for the outer skin, I would recommend switching to a smaller brush. I'm going to use a size 3. And I don't have to go in super light because this is a very, very dark area. But even with very dark shapes, even when there is a very dark, let's say black looking shape in a reference photo, I still want to develop at least a couple of values in those areas. Okay, a gray, and then maybe push it with a second layer, something like that. So it's what I'm getting at. It's best to go in lighter and then go into darken areas than to go in too dark, because you're not going to be able to lighten that very easily. Okay, you would have to go in and do some scrubbing or something. Now for this section, I am leaving more of a sliver of paper unpainted in between the green and the gray. And this is because there is a thickness to this skin, and I want to communicate that by leaving a little sliver of paper unpainted here and there. There is a thickness to this very dark skin. And you can even see that if you look closely at the reference photo, you can see some very, very light kind of sections in the thickness of the skin created where the skin was cut. You can see some very, very light sections And by me protecting that, I can communicate more of the thickness of the skin. I don't want to leave a white looking outline, okay? But I do want to leave some slivers of paper alone. Now, the skin goes all the way around the avocado, right? It's not just down here. But this is the shape, okay? You can see this bottom section as a shape that you actually painted in. And then everything else around the avocado is just a line. We're just going in with a single stroke, right? I want to be careful though, because with something like this, again, I want to stay away from the look of outlines. And so when I'm creating this kind of, when I'm painting this kind of detail, sometimes like I want a regularity, I want imperfection throughout the strokes that I create. So sometimes my lines are not even connecting. Other times I'm pressing down a little bit more, and other times I'm just touching the tip of my brush to my paper. And this creates line weight variation. And line weight variation is super key when you're painting anything organic. It makes things look more natural. Okay. So see, check that out. I left little sections unpainted in between the green and my brownish grayish color. And it's not a stark, thick looking outline. I painted that in sections and I have line weight variation throughout that brownish gray that I painted in. What does line weight variation mean? It simply means that some sections are thicker and darker and other sections are thinner and lighter. Or maybe your line is even broken here and there. That is going to lead to more natural looking results. Okay. Now, if you want to darken sections within that, especially in this bottom section, if this is still wet, which for me it is, I could just pop it in there and darken some sections, and this will create a range of values. Here I'm doing a little bit of lifting. That is exactly what I mean with range of values. This section looks lighter gray, like a lighter gray. And then I have darker grays around that. And over here, it becomes lighter. Instead of going in and just painting this with a very dark, flat color, which even if you see that in the reference photo, don't do it, because it's best to bring in your artistic license and ask yourself, how can I create some lighter areas? How can I create some darker areas? It's, it all comes back to knowing what makes the medium shine and making decisions that will help you arrive at great looking results with the medium on hand. And going in and painting a flat looking black color is going to lead to flat results. So if you want flat results, more graphic results, maybe more, I don't know, cartoony results, which is fine. But if you want that, then cool. But if you don't, then try to bring in a variety of values wherever you can. Okay. So finally, my cast shadow. I can't really paint the cast shadow for the seed right now, because if I try, like, this is in a weird semi-dry state, first of all. I shouldn't touch it, okay? But the thing as well is that I want that to be a sharp edge. And I won't be able to paint a sharp edge right now because it's damp. It'll become fuzzy along the edges. So I can't do it right now, okay? Now, for this cast shadow, I think I'm going to use a different color because I just painted it just use this for the outer skin. So why not mix together? Maybe I want to see what gray mixing together this red and my sap green creates. And if I like it, I'll use that for my cast shadow color. It becomes a kind of a vibrant looking brownish color, the sap green plus this permanent red light. Don't know if I'm going to be able to get a gray. We'll see. It's a nice looking brown. The more green I add into the mix, the darker the brown. The more red, the lighter the brown. Again, because red and green are complementary colors. But you can use whichever color you want. I just wanted to provide different options that you can explore for your shadows. Let's see. That still looks a little bit too green to me, like a greenish olive color. This almost looks like this brown that I used in the seed. I'm gonna go ahead and use it as is. Should be nice. It looks similar. So I'm gonna paint in the cast shadow shape. This is my size 14 brush, by the way. Very carefully painting around the skin. Taking a little bit of water from my container and softening the effect a little. And I'm gonna add a little bit more green into this mix. Get it more toward the green side, just for a bit of color and value variation in my cast shadow. And I'm gonna pop that in closer to the object to create an occlusion shadow effect. Soften that a little. You can soften the edges of your cast shadow. Maybe push this paint a little bit closer to the skin. All right. I'm gonna leave this alone. Don't want to overwork things. And there we go. So I'm gonna leave that to dry completely because right now, as I said, it's damp. And if I continue working right now, it's gonna be pretty, I'm gonna start creating backgrounds and splotchiness more than backgrounds at this point. Okay. So this is essentially, let me move this media here. Okay, there we go. This is what I was able to achieve in one single layer, okay? The better you get at understanding value and controlling your mixtures and your water and all this, the more you can do in one single layer, all right? It's very likely that if you're just getting started with watercolor, if you try to develop this range of values that I've created, maybe you won't be able to do as much with one single layer, okay? I went through that as well. I was not able to create such a wide range of values and description in one single layer when I was first getting started. It took a while, okay, for me to develop this skill. But the more you develop your skill, the better your paintings or illustrations become in one single layer because the more you can do in one single layer. Okay. Now, as I said in the beginning of this class, there is no right or wrong way of approaching watercolor. Many watercolor artists would leave this exactly as is and wouldn't do anything else. And that's beautiful. That's fine. Okay. But what happens if you want to develop a little bit more detail, a little bit more contrast? Maybe you are only able to stay within those very light values in this initial layer, and you want to continue developing darker midtones and darkest darks to arrive at a level of realism that you desire. That's fine too. Do it in subsequent layers, but make sure that you're allowing each layer to dry completely in between, because otherwise you can arrive at an overworked result very, very easily with watercolor. Okay? Be patient. Go in with a strategy, be patient in between your layers, and when you work swiftly and don't overblend. Okay? The way that I like approaching my layering is oftentimes I do 2, max 3 layers at this point. In the beginning of my journey, I worked in 5, 6 layers. And I oftentimes arrived at overworked results because I didn't allow layers to dry completely in between. But that's a different story. But But now I can do more in fewer layers. And for me, it's important to work in fewer layers because the more layering you do, especially when you don't fully understand the medium, the more chances there are that you'll arrive at overworked flat results. Okay. Your layering has to be strategic. There are artists that work in 10 layers or more. Okay, and are able to arrive at super photorealistic results. Not that that is the goal for everyone. It's definitely not for me. But they know the medium and they're patient. They have a strategy for each layer, right? They don't go in and cover up lighter areas because they know that if they cover up lighter areas, they're going to arrive at flat looking results that are very heavy. So what I'm getting at is it all depends on you and what results you're wanting. For me, I enjoy a level of realism, but I still want my painting to look painterly and expressive. And so I just go in with a couple layers, maybe three, if there's something that I can't do in a second layer. So I'm going to show you what I would personally do. Okay, what would I do to these illustrations to take them further? Once you have decided on your colors, there is no guesswork involved. Okay, you just go back to your previous colors and use your darker versions of those colors for the detail that you're wanting to add in. Okay, so what I mean by this is, for example, if I want to add in the vein for the leaves, I can go in with my medium green or my darkest green and develop that detail with these same colors. So size 3 round brush. First going in with the medium green so that I don't create a very stark looking line or something. And I just go in and paint a very thin line there. Same thing for the other leaf. I don't want these details to be very stark looking or anything like that. I just want them to be subtle. I don't want to go in and create a very stark looking line. And if I want any slight definition along the edges of the leaves, for example, you can just go in and create slightly darker shapes along the edges with your medium color or your darkest color. Just be careful with your darkest color, okay? The darker you get, the starker it's going to look. Let's just say that I want to create a darker shadow shape under the leaf. Let me pop up the lemon image again. Let's just say that I want to darken the shadow shape under the leaf. I go back to my greens. You could even use your darkest green at this point. It all depends on the value that you have already developed there. Because if you paint a very dark shape over a very light background, that is going to be very, very contrasting, okay? If that's the case for you, you want to develop your midtones first. So for this, because I already have those kind of darker midtones developed, I can just go in wet on dry and paint a shadow shape. And if I want to soften the edge, I go in with a clean, a slightly damp brush. Soften. But I'm now painting wet on dry, mostly, so I'm being left with sharp, defined edges. If you want to go in and push darks in the lemon, okay, maybe your first layer was too light. You were not able to go as dark as I did. What I would personally do would be to re-wet the lemon with clean water and then continue working wet into wet by placing your yellow ochre, your warm yellow and then your yellow ochre and continuing to develop those soft effects with wet on wet. And then once you've developed a nice range of values, then go ahead and go in wet on dry with sharper shapes. Because otherwise, if you're working, it's really a taste thing because you could do it wet on dry too, but you do risk having more texture in your painting. Okay. Let's just say that I want to create a little bit of definition along this upper edge. I can go in with this medium color that has a yellow ochre in it. I can develop a little bit of a shadow shape down here. And if you want to even create a little bit of texture, you can create a speckled look by using your yellow ochre with your burnt sienna. I'm going to try not to get this in my other fruits, but this is a way that you can create some texture in the lemon by doing some splattering. Okay, it's a little bit too dark. I'm going to soften this here. You know, that's one way that you can create some subtle texture in the lemon. And what else? So those are the techniques that I use for definition and a little bit more detail. I can also darken certain sections of the stem a little bit more, and I would probably use my darker brown that I created by mixing together the burnt sienna with the ultramarine. Just make sure that it looks like a darker brown and not a gray. To develop some detail in the stem, just go in and darken some sections. See how by just adding a tiny bit more detail, all of a sudden the illustration really pops? And that's it. That's really all you need for your second layer. For me, that is enough detail already for my taste, okay? If you want to add more detail, then of course you can go in with another layer, but allow this one to dry. If I wanted to darken certain parts of the cast shadow, I can do that as well. But for me, I like it like that, okay? I don't really think I need any more detail. That's already a very descriptive illustration. It looks realistic. It communicates a sense of dimension. Light is consistent. It has a level of detail that I enjoy. It also looks painterly. I'm good to leave it like that, okay? Cool. So I'm gonna do the same thing for the clementine. Going back to my colors that I used for this one, which now that we're developing darker midtones and darkest darks, I no longer need the warm yellow on its own. I would now use the second color and the third color that I used for the orange sections, which were my warm yellow plus the permanent red light, my red orange, and then I continued adding red orange into that, and then I even added some burnt sienna. Okay, so size 6 round brush, because I'm only painting smaller areas right now. And I'm gonna go in with my warm yellow plus permanent red light mix. Okay, I don't want it too dark. I want it a little bit darker than what I have already there, but not too dark that it'll look too stark and contrasting. Oh, let me change my photo. There we go. Okay. So here, I just want to darken some shadow areas. I'm going to paint in my shadows here. And then maybe I want to use some green. Oh no, that's just a bleed that happened. Okay, I can create a little bit of definition over the bleed with my orange. Don't want to create an outline effect. And then I darken the edges a little bit more, maybe, using a bit of a scribbling motion. I'm gonna remove this paint from my paintbrush bristles, remove that excess water, and use the same paint that I just placed on my paper, pull it in a little bit more, and use a texture motion, kind of a scribbling, stippling motion as I bring this paint down and simultaneously enhance that texture. Scribbling motion here for texture. Increasing the texture while developing darker values simultaneously. Bringing in some burnt sienna. Darkening some sections with my burnt sienna. Doing a little bit of stippling with the burnt sienna as well. Remove that paint from my paintbrush bristles and use a bit of a scribbling motion as I am distributing that paint. And I'm just going to add in a little bit of these little bumps at the top by painting in some shapes there. And do remember that watercolor dries lighter than how it looks when it's wet. So that's always something that we're kind of managing as well. Can bring in a little bit of texture into the lights, though I would be very careful not to go overboard in this area because you can end up darkening the lightest areas too much if you do too much texture there. So just be careful. All right, I think that is enough. Definitely enough texture. As long as the paint is still wet, you can always go in and soften. Okay, great. So now I'm going to add a little bit more detail in the leaves, going back to my smallest brush. This is my size 3, and I'm just going to be painting in a little hint of that middle vein, subtle hint, making sure that these lines and marks are not super stiff looking. Maybe a little bit of dark values in the stem as well. And over here. Should have probably gone in with my green brown color that I created for the stem if I wanted to darken sections in the stem. But that's what happens when you are lazy. Definitely happens when you're lazy. I'm going back to this brownish green color for darker values in the stem. I think that looks better. Okay. And if you want to darken, oh, I didn't do any definition along the edges of my leaves. You can definitely add in some darker shapes in the leaves as well. I just like going over certain edges with abstract shapes. And soften edges whenever I think they're a little bit too stark looking. And here, you could create a darker shape here. Wet on dry. Soften the edge. And down here. And soften. All right, I think that is enough. You could always darken sections of the cast shadow if you wanted to. Just make sure that you're going back to that color that you used in the cast shadow, okay? All right, great. And finally, there's the avocado, right? So you can definitely see the difference, right? Between, hold on, let me take away or remove the image for a moment. You can definitely see the difference between these two, where I have created another layer, and this one, right? It's important to know that not only will watercolor dry lighter than how it looks when it's wet, but also watercolor tends to become more muted as well as it dries. And so this is why a lot of people leave their paintings alone. They leave them to dry and then come back the next day and then, ask themselves if there is any more work that they want to do to maybe brighten areas up with a glaze or something like that, or darken areas a little bit more. Okay, so that is important to know. As you can see, this looks a lot lighter, like it's missing the contrast that these two have, which I developed already with layer number 2, right? So that is what I'm looking to create in this layer. It's a little, push the contrast a little bit more, maybe define some edges here and there, and maybe enhance the texture a little bit more. But I want to keep my value work intact, right? I want to expand the range of values, not take away, right? I hope that that makes sense. So for this last one, the first thing that I'm going to do, I should probably change to my other brush. This is my size 6. The first thing that I'm going to do is darken the green around the edges a little bit more. So I can go in with my medium green, which is the sap green. And this is my size 6 brush. And I'm just going to paint some shapes along some of the edges here. Soften. Hold on, let me grab my absorbent towel so that you can see how often I'm dabbing my brush on my absorbent towel. I don't want to darken with wet on dry all around the flesh, because that's going to look very outliney. I don't want to do that, so I skipped a section there. And I'm just darkening sections here and there to increase the contrast, softening the inner edge. And if you want to even go in with a tiny bit of blue over this, you can, to further increase the contrast. I think I'm good. Okay, the other thing that I want to do is paint the cast shadow on the green. And let me pop up the avocado pick. So that I want to paint in with a greenish brown color. So I can go back to this green brown that I created by mixing together my sap green with a little bit of burnt sienna, kind of a muted olive green color. And I can still see my shadow shape that I sketched in pencil right here next to the seed. So I'm going to go in and paint that. And if you want to soften an edge, you can. I'm going to soften with a clean and slightly damp brush. And you can definitely see how all of a sudden the seed looks raised. Why? Because we painted the shadow. And this looks weird to me now because this looks very dark and the cast shadow under the avocado doesn't. It no longer looks dark to me because of this new contrast that we've developed. So if you want to go in and darken the shadow a little bit more, go back to the same color that you used in the cast shadow and just paint that in, but darken the closest section to the avocado so that you can create an occlusion shadow effect. The occlusion shadow is the closest part of the cast shadow right up against the object. which tends to be darker, because what happens is that, yes, the cast shadow shape is pretty dark, but usually it's able to catch some light. Whereas the occlusion shadow shape, there is no light getting in there. So it looks darker than the rest of the shadow shape, okay? So all of a sudden, it looks a little bit better because my two cast shadow shapes kind of have that same range or finish. Whereas before, one looked a little bit darker and it looked unfinished because they didn't look the same. So now there's a little bit of a more consistent effect in my shadow shapes, okay? All right. So now what about the seed? Let's go ahead and start adding some darks in the seed and enhance that sense of volume. We need to go back to the burnt sienna. Let me add some burnt sienna here. And we're also going to be adding some blue into the burnt sienna, which at this point I'm almost done, so I can add in the blue right here and add in more burnt sienna here so that I can get a darker brown, chocolatey brown. There we go. Remove that dark brown from my paintbrush bristles, and I want to go in with my slightly larger brush, my size 8. I go in with my burnt sienna. I observe the reference photo, and remember this half should be darker. So I'm focusing on adding or layering color in the right half, not necessarily over everything, but if I'm going to be developing darker values, they should be on the dark side, right? Soften edges. If you hear some noises, it's one of my cats who wants to get into the room. Okay. See how I darkened this side? So now I can go in with a darker version of this and just pop it in where I see it in the reference photo over here. Once again, reinforcing those darks. Remove that paint from my paintbrush bristles, remove that excess water, and you can soften edges if you want to. I can even add a little bit of a mid-tone on this edge, along this edge, on the light side. That is fine, but I'm still making sure to leave plenty of lights on this side. Doing a little bit of lifting here. Clean and slightly damp brush, just slightly damp. And right here. Beautiful. If your paper is still damp and you want to push a little bit more with your dark brown mix, you can, but make sure again that the darker you get, the more intentional you are about where you place those darkest darks. Okay? Observe the reference photo and bring to mind the three-dimensional structure of that object. Okay? And finally, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my size 3 round brush. I should probably just continue adding more blue to this one here because my others have green in them. And I want to go back to the same color that I was using for the outer skin, which is my burnt sienna plus blue color combo. There it is. And now, because we're just looking to push those darkest darks, I can go in with more of a milk consistency. And all I'm going to do is darken certain sections within this. Because again, I want some lighter gray areas and I want some darker gray areas. You can even enhance the sense of texture down here by doing a tiny bit of scribbling, but don't go overboard. Less is more when working with watercolor, I've found. Okay. Just darkening some little sections. Let me know if you have any final questions because we are pretty much done here. And I want to make sure that I answer everything that you need before leaving you. if you weren't here before when I mentioned this, make sure that you stay tuned. If you're a YouTube subscriber, where if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. Okay, first and foremost, because a lot of you are watching my videos, but you're not subscribed. And if you don't subscribe, it's very likely that you won't see me again because thank you, algorithm. Okay, so that's number one. And if you are subscribed on YouTube, then make sure to stay tuned because every month I'm going to be teaching a live class just like this one. But I will be switching. Hold on, let me move on back to the screen. Wow. My throat is parched, you guys. Too much talking. Okay. Hello again. So if you are subscribed on my YouTube channel, stay tuned because every month I will be teaching a class just like this one where we're working through exercises together to help us build foundational sketching and watercolor skills. If you have been watching my YouTube videos for a while or you have been a Patreon member, then you're already aware of how I enjoy sharing both watercolor and sketching tutorials. And this is because I want to give you the tools that you need to be able to draw and paint whatever you want and not have to depend on outline sketches provided by people in order to be able to paint something. I want you to be able to sketch and then paint whatever you want. And so over on Patreon, I have a huge, extensive library that teaches you how to draw anything from faces to buildings to still life arrangements to animals, right? And as well, along with my watercolor tutorials. And you'll find many of these tutorials on YouTube as well. But what I'm going to be doing each month is, and these live streams I've been making on my Patreon for over 6 years that I've had my Patreon. But what I'm going to be doing starting this year is I'm going to be opening them up for everyone on YouTube to watch. And my Patreon members are going to decide what the class is going to be about. They're going to decide the class topic, and I'm going to prepare a class based on what they have chosen. And all of my downloadables, my outline sketches, my reference photos, cheat sheets that I have created, my color swatches, whatever I have done to prepare for the class, I'm going to be sharing over on Patreon the day before the class. Okay. And there is a free tier of my Patreon in case you'd like to join. It's free. Okay. You can stay on top of these live stream situations. You can grab these downloadables as soon as I make them available over there. And so there's that. But even if you're just a YouTube subscriber, stay tuned for these because they're going to be, I think they're going to be very, very not only fun, but helpful for you guys who are starting to build up your sketching and watercolor skills. So yeah, and I'm going to be doing one watercolor, one sketching, one watercolor, one sketching, and so on. Okay, alternating between the two because I think that both of them are so important. Okay, anyway, I think that that's it. Let's see if I have any final questions. Oops, sorry. I'm glad it was so helpful. Valerie, thank you so much for popping in. And Susan, thank you so much for popping in as well. I really, really hope that this was helpful for you, that it was super valuable. And I'm really looking forward to sharing many, many more classes and lessons with you and continuing to develop and practicing our sketching and our watercolor together. Susan, I'm so happy it was helpful. All right, everyone. So I seem to have no more questions. I want to thank you so very much for joining me today. This was super fun. And I'm always so happy to get to connect with people from all over the world. And I'm really looking forward to our following next classes. And every week as well, I'm sharing other tutorials on YouTube and more extensive tutorials on my Patreon, which are real-time and fully narrated. So thank you so much, Patreon members who made it here Thank you so much for being a part of that innermost art community of mine. Patreon is essentially my little art school. It's my main priority. And yeah, let's see. Annette, I'm so happy that you've joined us here on YouTube. Thank you, thank you. It means a lot. Thank you, Dare, for popping in. And I think that's it. I think there are no more questions. Make sure to, if you ever have any questions, I'm always available via email, hello@ericalancaster.com, and also on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Erica_Lancaster_art. We can connect over there. Send me a DM. I'm always happy to help. And also, if you have any questions, if you check out a YouTube video, you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I also make sure to get back to all of my YouTube comments as well. Sometimes I take a little bit longer to respond to YouTube comments just because I'm always prioritizing Patreon and email and even Instagram before I get to YouTube. But yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Candace, Annette, Susan, Valerie, Miss Piano, Sharon, Elf Lords, Ronnie, James, uh, double exposure photo. Hold on. Dennis. Is it Dennis? You are the photographer, right? You're on my Patreon. Yes, you're doing super, super well. Laurel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take good care and please, please enjoy your art practice. Enjoy it. Thanks so much and talk to you very, very soon. Bye, everyone.